a lot of that within our community to help accomplish our mission. And as you said earlier, I definitely agree. The more you collaborate, the bigger the bridge.
Can you say a little bit more about that, about how you amplify voices when you collaborate? That's kind of interesting.
Well, sure. So, for instance, let's just say going to Annapolis, Maryland to give testimony in support or opposition to a bill. Many people are very uncomfortable speaking up in public, but we are happy to help them write testimony if they need help, and engage them in, especially this year in Annapolis with COVID, there's a whole new way to submit written testimony in support or opposition to a bill. So we can help coach community members who might need some help in getting their testimony submitted. And if they don't have access to a computer and they can't do it, then we'll submit it for them. So, and we also have worked with communities to help bring them together and educate them on a particular issue, and then offer support and resources if needed to give that community the ability to speak up themselves and fight whatever it is, that it may be a pollution source in their community, or maybe they want to speak out in support of something that's going to help their local community. So again, it's just that give and take engagement and offering the resources and the support that we can so that people have a larger voice. And that's what I mean by amplifying their voices.
That's very cool. Okay, so the next question is, can you talk about a challenging time in your professional life when you faced opposition and how you overcame it? What have you found to be the most effective ways to find common ground to those that oppose you? We start with Val.
Okay, so before I answer this, I just need to give you all a little bit of quick background on Audubon to help set the stage, because the group that I'm going to be talking about is actually an internal group, our chapters. So for those of you who may not be familiar with us, the National Audubon Society has been around for more than 100 years, and we're rooted in advocacy. We were actually started by a group of women who launched a grassroots campaign against the fashion industry in the early 1900s to stop the killing of birds, to use their feathers in hats. So over the years, we've developed, clearly a very strong scientific expertise that we use to inform all of our conservation work. And we've also led the charge for the passage of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, a bedrock bill for bird protection that's been in place for 103 years. But our focus on advocacy, particularly political advocacy, has ebbed and flowed over time. So fast forwarding to the present, we've returned to our advocacy roots following the release of our first Birds and Climate report back in 2014 that clearly found climate change is the greatest threat to birds. And when this shift happened, we looked to our chapters for support on the advocacy front. Now, some of our chapters have been around for longer than our national office. Many started as bird clubs, and unlike what you might think when you hear the word chapter, they're each their own separate 501c3. So related yet separate organizations from the national and state and regional Audubon offices. So of course, we work very closely with our chapters, and we're always collaborating on a number of things, and they have a shared love of birds, but varying degrees of capacity and resources for programming and engagement. They also have varying degrees of interest in advocating for policy, which in many cases really has more to do with being unfamiliar and uncomfortable in the policy space than anything else. So one of the ways that we're trying to grow interest and build confidence is through the formation of the Delaware River Watershed Chapter Advocacy Working Group. So my focus is, on here within the Delaware River Watershed. We've got 6 chapters in Pennsylvania, 1 in Delaware, and 2 in New York that span the entire landscape of the Delaware River watershed. And so it just seemed like, again, as I said, the chapters were, interested in advocacy, of course, wanting to help, but, you know, really not knowing where to begin and having a little bit of trouble, you know, getting started. And so to pull them together under that umbrella, we thought would be helpful to be able to provide a platform so that they would have a shared identity. And so what this group really does is we meet the chapters where they are, we empower them to succeed, and we support their efforts. When you think about it, you know, as I mentioned, many of our chapters started as bird clubs. Leading bird walks is something that is, you know, square in the center of their wheelhouse and that they're very comfortable with. So sort of taking that and layering in, you know, information that is relevant for policy, you know, sort of doing legislative bird walks, kind of expanding and taking things to the next level where chapters are and leaders are in a space where they're able to let their passion shine through and to be able to share personal stories and to be able to build confidence in the fact that the knowledge that they have is actually very related to what we're doing in the world of policy. And that's where the sort of empowerment comes in, to be able to, as I said, with the building bridges, you know, connecting those dots and letting people realize that, you know, the information that they have is actually very relevant. We also take a very place-based approach. So working, you know, we're working on the state and the federal level in terms of policy. Working with municipal townships and municipalities is a great way for chapters who are, you know, sort of have specific territories, being able to work within their territory and their chapter area to make the same sort of change on a local level that we're looking to see on the state and federal level. So they sort of have a hands-on training and also, you know, practice in some ways, you know, to sort of not be so intimidated if they are meeting with a member of Congress or something like that down the road, and to be able to have, you know, tangible outcomes that they can see and that their members can see. And in this way, they stay motivated to keep engaged, to go deeper. And then, of course, we provide as much support as possible and foster that peer-to-peer networking and resource sharing, which is actually so important and really helpful to, you know, to continuing to have sustainable outcomes.
So it sounds like a lot of your work has been to move volunteers up the ladder of engagement.
Yes.
Right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And again, they're all at very different starting points. You know, some are very tentative, and the fact that we've pulled this working group together and that they are among, you know, peers with each other, I think is sometimes a little bit more, it's more inviting, and it encourages people who maybe if I was just working one-on-one with them would not have necessarily put their toe in the water. They might have just been like, yeah, we don't really do that. But the fact that they're with others, they kind of, there's a place to plug in, you know, other people are further along, or we're creating, co-creating shared resources and, you know, kind of talking together and having conversations about what people really need and trying to fulfill that. And it just kind of allows people to, you know, to kind of dovetail with what the other is doing and help people move forward no matter where their starting point is.
Yeah, like you said earlier, safe space, creating a safe space.
Exactly.
And I love that you encourage people to advocate by finding their own voices and having their own ideas about how to do it, because I'm sure that empowers them to leave their comfort zone and maybe reach out in a way that they wouldn't have before.
Exactly. I mean, once they really sort of get over the hump of, oh, you know, I'm talking about policies, or you know, because I think many of them are very nervous about being asked a question. They're used to knowing what they're talking about, you know, leading bird walks, identifying birds, you know, and so to sort of be in a position to maybe not have the answer. But you know, with advocacy, and I'm sure Kathy and Ruth and others would agree, a lot of times it's not so much the facts, it's the passion and the fact that you care about an issue that comes through. And when you're talking with a legislator, local, state, or federal, you know, sure, we're representing Audubon, but, you know, we are their constituents as well. And to sort of, you know, have that genuine, concern for something that's going on is what really, because that's what's going to translate into votes, into, you know, continuing to push for these issues, into, you know, demonstrating a clear interest in something that isn't just a passing thing or rattling off a bunch of talking points that people don't know. And I think that that's the other piece. I think that it's easy to get up to speed with the facts and the details of policy and legislation while you're, you know, doing a bird walk or doing a program. So, you know, eventually they kind of have that in their heads, but they're not so focused on memorizing that sort of thing. They're able to lead with birds, which is where they are more comfortable, and then, you know, expand to the rest and have more of a conversation, which at the end of the day is something that I think, you know, kind of sets the stage for success with anybody.
Yeah. How about you, Ruth? Can you talk about a challenging time in your professional life when you faced opposition and you overcame it? And what have you found to be the most effective way to find common ground with those that oppose you?
I think through action for me, and really be passionate, using Valerie's word. In the early 1990s, over-harvesting of the crabs in the Delaware Bay brought a lot of organizations to the foreground, including National Wildlife Federation, National Audubon, and the state chapters in Audubon, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Connecticut, American Bird Conservancy. That was the beginning of an outcry. We need to save the horseshoe crabs. Partnership for the Delaware Bay joined in, Conserve Wildlife Federation, Dr. Larry Niles, we owe him so much for his research on the shorebirds that need the viable crabs from the horseshoe crabs. And his research was, again, one of those other building blocks. All right, this is why we want to save the red knot and 3 other of the shorebird populations. So why save a horseshoe crab? All right, well, horseshoe crab is very good and it's very important. It predates, by the way, the dinosaurs by 250 million years. And 85% of the population lives in the Delaware Bay. And we have put a lot of things in the Delaware Bay and they still have no disease. And that's because their blood recognizes viral and bacterial. It's important to our human health. It's important to the ecosystem of the Delaware Bay and their whole range from Maine to Yucatan. And of course, to the migratory shorebirds that are dependent on their way up to the Arctic tundra. And so getting involved with that, well, I started off with petitions and then got involved in the research that U.S. Fish and Wildlife did on counting crabs. And you would go out during the night, during full moon in May, and really count the crabs. And I led many trips for that. And then other organizations started to become involved. It's really a building block. The more education, the more communication. Why? Taking people to see them, which I've been fortunate enough to take hundreds of people to view the phenomenon, which everybody should see once, the shorebirds arriving and of course the spawning of the crabs. And now they even play an important role because the biomedical labs that make a compound out of the blood of horseshoe crabs, and that blood is turned into a compound called LAL and used in hospitals to test for infectious bacteria in IVs, in any liquid medicine that any of your family members, anybody's received since the 1980s. It's been tested by this compound. Now it's a key role in the COVID-19 vaccine, which again is one of the reasons it's so important to our human health. And the Bayshore Project down in Bivalve under the auspices of Megan Wren started. She formed hundreds of volunteers that now go out on the spawning beaches every May and turn the stranded crabs upright to return to the sea, or even put them back into the surf. Every crab you save, especially females, saves the viable eggs for the shorebirds. And that's why, you know, they're declining so much for those viable eggs. That's what the shorebirds are dependent on. So yes, save the crabs. And in honor of this conference today, the Wetlands Institute now collects eggs and raises them in tanks. And they're the crab, when they come out, they're 15 to 30 days later, they're about the size of your thumb, not counting the tail. After their second molt, they're returned to the bay. That is awesome now. And that's why I said it's step after step after step, and many hundreds of organizations and community organizations that get involved. Educating a community is really the base of it. And now they have a program called Adopt a Crab. And Birding with Ruth has adopted 2 leatherback turtles, so why not crab? So in honor of today, I am adopting 3 crabs this week, and they're going to be called Climate, Change, and Lobby. And they will be released today by June or July in honor of the conference. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Ruth. You know, with the crab having so many things like, you know, medical research and overfishing to contend with, it's really encouraging to hear that there's so many organizations that are coming together to change hearts and minds around the issues. Yeah. How about you, Kathy? Can you talk about a challenging time in your life when you faced opposition and you overcame it? And what have you found to be the most effective ways to find common ground with those that oppose you?
Well, I can say in my line of work, I run up against challenges all the time, but that's the nature of being a waterkeeper. So my organization, Assateague Coastal Trust, has been here in the Coastal Bays watershed for, actually now we're going into our 51st year. And it has always been the voice of advocacy here in the watershed, always speaking truth to power, and our membership belongs to us because of that, because they know that we do that, and no other environmental organization in the watershed speaks quite as loudly as we do. Assateague Coastal Trust then joined Waterkeeper Alliance, and that's when the Assateague Coastkeeper began. And I am the current Assateague Coastkeeper. Waterkeeper Alliance is a global alliance of over 300 clean water advocates who provide a voice for their local river or waterway. And ACT also belongs to a number of regional coalitions working together to educate and engage communities in ways to reduce pollution sources in their waterways. So for me, where I live on Maryland's coastal portion of the Eastern Shore, we're threatened by sea level rise and saltwater intrusion into our groundwater and our aquifers. We're threatened by more frequent and intense storms, heavier rainfall amounts, which we're about to get in the next couple of days, and all the other gifts of a changing climate. My organization has taken a position that we must transition to cleaner, more sustainable sources of energy like offshore wind and solar. And when we announced this position, a number of our members, most notably one particular member, were very upset with ACT because they believed the offshore wind turbines would kill millions of birds. And they had other concerns too, including how offshore wind would impact their view of the ocean. And many had concerns about how the onshore transmission of the energy might impact them. And so because there seemed, well, let me backtrack back to our upset members. One particular member was so upset with our organization, and he'd been a donor member for many, many years. He refused to make a donation during our annual appeal, and he also threatened to send letters to the editor of all the regional newspapers telling people to not support our nonprofit any longer because we supported offshore wind. And my board president and myself, we tried to have conversations with him, but we just weren't getting anywhere. So because there seemed to be so much disinformation being spread in the public discourse, more like propaganda than science-based information, I formed a coalition between Assateague Coastal Trust, National Audubon Society, and the University of Delaware. And together we sought funding from the University of Delaware to hold a series of what we called information exchanges with environmental groups, politicians, community groups, local birding groups, including Audubon members, and present data and information that the university had gathered over the past few years. And to also listen to concerns and questions from the community so we could try to address those or be able to respond to their concerns later. These information exchanges are now being edited and prepared for a series of webinars that ACT, Audubon, and University of Delaware we're hoping to present this coming spring or early summer. And we hope that this will at least help to educate the local community, give them more data and information than I think they were getting from the one or two voices that were in our watershed, most notably the town of Ocean City, about the evils of offshore wind and the concern about the offshore, the horizon view and impacts to local businesses and et cetera. So we'll definitely let you all know when those webinars are going to begin, because we'd love to have you and your members participate. And as a final note, ACT and Audubon collaborated on a joint opinion piece for the Baltimore Sun that stated that our joint support for energy production from offshore wind was because the real threat to birds and other coastal habitats, including humans, is climate change. That there is a much greater threat to our bird populations by losing habitat and this, you know, we need to move away from fossil fuel extraction and move to cleaner and more sustainable sources of energy. So that was printed in the Baltimore Sun, and our one disgruntled member was so pleased to see the collaboration between Audubon and ACT that he came back to the fold. So sometimes collaboration can actually rebuild a bridge.
I love that story about the donor who changed his mind after you wrote that op-ed. That was such a creative solution. So we've talked about birds and horseshoe crabs and the need to advocate for them. And we've talked about watershed health and preserving water quality. And we've also touched on building bridges through collaboration. Given that the three of you have such wonderful overlap in your efforts, I wonder if you have any ideas about how you might be able to help each other. How could you build a bridge between the organizations?
Valerie, I'm already involved in Audubon Adventures, which I meant to mention the other day. And one other thing I wanted to mention, the program that BiValve have is Return the Favor for the crabs, which is very important. But really, and I already started telling people about Kathy with her Coastkeepers program with friends. So that is wonderful for me, since I'm a connector. That's what Birding with Ruth does, is connect people through the activities, through presentations, through some of my Zoom presentations I do now. So being involved in Audubon Adventures, and I think Valerie said they're going to reassess maybe their bird town, but I will keep my involvement up there in that education with the schools, and definitely connect more with Kathy Phillips with the Coastkeepers, because I love to go there, and many people who have Birding with Ruth, they can also join in on any involvement along that line and spread the word also.
Yeah, I love that, Ruth. I think that's, we definitely need to keep in touch and explore all the possibilities. I feel like, you know, our chapter in Delaware, as well as some of the chapters kind of on the border of Delaware and Pennsylvania, have like a even deeper interest and connection with, you know, the red knots and where they are. And the other piece is the fact that Audubon is working hard to support, work with the FDA to have them start using a synthetic alternative for the LPL that Ruth was mentioning. So there is something else that can be used instead of the horseshoe crab blood. And the EU FDA, the EU version of the FDA is has been using it for quite some time, and there's a lot going on to help advocate for that to happen here in the US as well. So that could be another area of overlap, I think.
Yeah, and I found it really interesting, Valerie, to hear what you had to say about how you're trying to transition some of your, well, not so much transition, but get them used to having more of an advocacy voice. And, you know, that is how we make change. That is how, no matter what the organization, it can't just always be, I call them the usual suspects, you know, like with me in Annapolis, it's me and, you know, 5 or 6 other environmental organizations that are always, you know, used to sit on the panels. But really, I liked what you had to say about legislators. They, you know, when you're speaking to a legislator, they don't want to hear the usual lobbyists' perspective or our perspective. They do want to hear from passionate people like Ruth. I mean, every time I hear Ruth talk, I can't get enough of it. I want to hear more and more about her stories, because telling our personal stories is so much stronger than just putting out some facts and figures. I mean, yes, you need the data, and you have to put that information out there, but it's really the passionate stories from individual citizens that make a big difference. So you know, I can definitely see ways that all 3 of us can work together on any number of issues, because you're right, both you and Ruth are right, that what's happening to these particular critters, the birds or the crabs, the horseshoe crabs, it's happening to us too. In fact, I have a bumper sticker that I keep up on my refrigerator, and it used to be my Facebook page cover photo, but it says, "What happens to the water happens to the people." And yeah, we just always constantly have to remind ourselves of that.
That's
yeah.
Boy, that's
Great ideas for collaboration. I really appreciate that. So I want to move us to questions, and we have some great questions coming in. This one is for Ruth, and it's I think that scientific research is really important, and yet we'd rather the horseshoe crab not be sourced. How would you find common ground with the scientists who had come to rely on using the crab for their work?
That is a fantastic question. And this gives, Val just mentioned that there's a synthetic product that Europe is already using. It is not approved though in the United States. All right. And to be a supplement, and that's why to be an alternative to the biomedical testing. And it is dangerous for the crabs, because it was thought that 10% of the crabs were being hurt by the bloodletting of the biomed testing. It turns out it's 30% that we're losing, and yet now that's where I mentioned this. It's a beginning challenge, because now we have to save the crab right from even more interpretation by the vaccine and how important they are to us. I mean.
Can I just jump in though? How would you talk to that scientist? How would you find, is there a common ground that you could?
I have tried to get an invitation to the labs. They are one of the most guarded facilities in the United States.
Well, let's pretend that you could.
What I would say to them is, well, first I would question why we couldn't get the synthetic in order, because we would be able then have a good start for saving the crab. If we at least save 30% of them from the biomedical testing. And I would say, why not, if we don't use the alternative in Europe, then how about us having a synthetic? I mean, that's one of the questions we've asked for years and years. And it's not that easy to duplicate what, well, just imagine the blood of the horseshoe crab. It's electric blue in color, by the way. And it's been around. Horseshoe crab has not changed and has no disease. It is not just something that somebody can think of. And that's the question I would say, why are we not developing a synthetic right here in the States? That would be my first question, in fact. Why are we not? And if we are, let it be known that we're going to get their way. Because now the crab now has an added issue because they're a key in developing vaccines. Their LAL is a key. It's one of the reasons, and it's already helped us in so many ways. That's one of the reasons, that's one of the things I would say. I actually have talked to individuals in pharmaceutical firms, all right, that because they, of course, that's where it is. And I will say something to you. 1 quart of the blood is $20,000. 1 gallon, $60,000. So there is revenue beyond really what I can probably comprehend at this minute. Imagine $20,000 of a quart of the blood and $60,000 for a gallon. That's how valuable. And that value has now gone up because of COVID-19. It really is. And I'm an optimist, though. I'm an incurable optimist. Because I think now that it's in the foreground and so many people knowing, I mean, that is why I picked horseshoe crab for today as a challenge to elite so many people, because we really are the ecosystem of that water. The Kathy is so involved in. That is, the crab is so important to that ecosystem, and especially in the Delaware Bay. And it's important to our health and the shorebirds. And we need to move, and the science has to be with that to save all 3 of us. The science has to be involved in that.
Okay, so another question. This one is for Kathy. My grandparents live in an ocean view condo. They've sheltered in place during the violent storms, but think that sea level rise is not a big threat. Do you have any advice about how to talk to them? I worry, and I know that I need to find something we can all agree on to help them understand.
Well, I'm sure that if they, and I wasn't certain, were they saying that they live here in Ocean City, or do they just say an oceanfront condo?
An ocean, yeah.
I mean, I know here in Ocean City, as people who are here year round are learning to live with flooded streets more and more often, even on sunny days, especially downtown. High, if a full moon and high tide combine, and we don't even have to have a storm, where many of our side streets downtown are underwater. The town of Ocean City is figuring ways to deal with this. For your parents, it's just if they haven't already experienced severe storms and noticed, because if they've lived in their oceanfront condo for a long time, they have probably noticed that over the past 10-15 years they're having higher tides out front. Again, if they're in Ocean City, they've probably seen the dune impacted many times and have to be rebuilt. This is the sort of event that used to happen only maybe once every 7 or 8 or 10 years. Now it's happening, sometimes as much as twice a year. So perhaps you can have conversations with them to inspire them to pay a little more attention to the weather, and make note of changes that they see where they live when we're having these weather events, and maybe keep a log. How many times have you seen the high tide come up enough that it makes you a little nervous? Or when have you driven down the street when it's had water on it? You know, maybe they can start keeping track of that, and then they'll start to realize, oh, this is happening a lot more often than it used to. That would be one suggestion to me, because it is a reality and it is happening. But I think a lot of people just don't want to recognize it. They like everything just the way it is right now. I know one time I posted a photograph on Facebook of this little, it's just a little house that is down off of Ferry Landing Road on Assateague Island on the bay side. And it used to be just when we'd have a hurricane or a big nor'easter, that little house would be completely surrounded by water, and the whole parking lot, like you couldn't even get out to the recreation area at the end of Ferry Landing Road because it was underwater. But now that can happen on every full moon. And I had posted a photo of the house with the parking lot underwater, and you could see the lines of the parking spaces, you know, underneath the water. And I just made a comment that, you know, this is something that the national park is dealing with now in their 25-year comprehensive plan. You know, they are looking to move some of these recreation areas to elsewhere where they won't be so impacted by the flooding. And this woman posted a long comment that, oh, you know, that's nothing to worry about. My Assateague Island is always going to look just the way it looks right now. And, you know, my favorite campsite is always going to be there, and we'll always be able to put our RV in the same campsite, you know, for 25 years, for the next 50 years. It's never going to change. And yet it is changing right in front of their eyes, but they're just not comfortable accepting, you know, the reality.
One of the things that we talk about in CCL is finding common values and having conversations around that. So I would say to that person, you know, if you can talk to your grandparents about how great it's been to be at the shore, and how we've, you know, always loved to be together on the beach, and, you know, just bring back some of those memories. It might be a reminder that, yeah, that we really want to save that. It's important to all of us. And maybe there's a way to think about how that might happen if you, like, I like your idea about keeping a log, raising their awareness, but also, you know, as they talked in the beginning plenary, it's about being heard. And if the grandparents can feel heard, yeah, they might remember that, yeah, this is something we really all care about. And that's where you start. That's where the collaboration starts. Just my 2 cents.
I would just add, I'll throw in my 2 cents as well. Jumping off of what both you and Kathy said, and this is just a small point, but, you know, it's the kind of words matter, and the language and how you phrase things can, you know, like just one small little thing that you might not even be thinking about is the turning point or the turning off point. And, you know, and we've found that, you know, sometimes people who are living in more rural communities, landowners, farmers, people who, you know, have generations of connections to places, and who aren't necessarily, you know, super receptive to the idea of climate change and everything else. But when you talk about environmental preservation, when you say preservation versus protection, it's a little bit, it's a very nuanced difference, but it kind of feels, to your point, Kathy, preservation feels like keeping things the same. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, this is what we've got, and we want to keep it this way. And sometimes, you know, when you're talking about protection or restoration, or like, I don't know, like the other things just have a different, they just hit people differently. Something about the word preservation resonates with, you know, at times it's not like 100%, but it's just something to think about, you know, how things are framed given who you're talking to, and what's really important to them, related, you know, relevant to, you know, the issue.
That's a really good point. Mm-hmm. Very subtle difference, but yeah. Okay, so another question. Could we ask these organizations to help our lobbying effort for CCL? So I guess the person is asking, would you be open to lobbying with us?
Well, I can start out saying that one of your members might be a board member, Charlie Garlow, from up in Delaware, Rehoboth.
Yeah, we know Charlie.
We've worked together on a couple of things where ACT has helped promote an issue that CCL is concerned about. I've also, in the middle of the summer, taken a table and information up to an event that CCL was hosting to just, help support them so that they could, and they did, get some great attention that weekend. So, we're all working towards the same goal. And so there's no reason why we can't help each other. And Charlie's been wonderful with Assateague Coastal Trust too. So if you're listening, Charlie, although I think he's on one of the other panels right now, so maybe not. But
this is being recorded, so we can all come back and listen, and you can listen to the other ones too. Okay, one more question here is for Val. In addition to building bridges to constituencies who might think differently about climate than we do, there are also communities who are already concerned about climate change, but might not be connecting with your organizations. Mm-hmm. Have you found any good strategies for reaching out to those communities?
Yeah, I think that this is where kind of working and empowering our chapters to, have more of a voice within their communities really can help. We do already, like I mentioned before, we work quite a bit with municipalities, which frequently have environmental advisory councils. And that's one avenue to kind of, be talking about ordinances or resolutions or just even working together to have community events. So in fact, Audubon has an entire strategy, which is called bird-friendly communities. We've got these 5 different pillars, and it's water, coasts, climate, healthy forests, but bird-friendly communities is also a strategy. And whereas the other 4 are very science driven, I always like to think of the bird-friendly communities as people driven, because this is where, because at the end of the day, all of the things that we're all wanting and advocating for and hoping to change really depends on people's behavior. And so, in many ways, we're looking to, sort of foster behavior change. And so I think that, certainly working with churches and schools. I mean, Audubon, Ruth mentioned our, Audubon Adventures program. That's something that brings in schools. And I think that it's really about being integrated and even within your organization, not having, sort of siloed approaches, but to sort of really be overlaying messaging that relates to the larger issue in all of the different, initiatives that you're doing. I did a couple of years ago, more specifically to your point about a community engagement, we did something called climate circles. So we worked with a municipality who had taken on a native plant resolution. So they were, sort of demonstrating commitment to increasing the number of native plants in the community to help with watershed health, to help, manage, stormwater, increase stormwater and all of that. And so what the idea was to get the community rallied around this and to really kind of get them, and even not even just that specific thing, but around climate in general. So we had a program where, it was a 2-part thing. So first we partnered with a theater and we did an environmental film, not series, but event. And there was a panel discussion after the film, and it was all talking about native plants, ecosystem health related to native plants, and that sort of thing. And then we kind of used that as an opportunity. We had a great discussion after the film, and we used that as an opportunity to say to everyone, hey, we're actually going to be having a program, a week and a half from now. you know, at the township, where we're going to be, you know, diving in even deeper and looking at solutions to this. And so then that's where the kind of part 2 was, and people came together, and it was a discussion group, and it was kind of like a lot of what Kathy was saying, and a lot of what Ruth was saying, where people are it's taking a step back from here's what's the problem and here's exactly what we need to do, but like, what are you seeing? What do you look around and you see, you know, increased flooding, trees fall, you know, like different environmental things. And then we used like a voting process to sort of identify the part that was the most important to everyone. And then that was the piece that then we kind of moved to the next phase of coming up with a solution for. And in the end, it was pop-up demonstration gardens that we sort of worked with, again, the township and residents now, because the idea was to get people who live within the township involved and having some amount of ownership in what's happening here, and hopefully being able not only to learn, but to be able to maintain and keep it all going. So those were, you know, it was like a 2-week event with the pop-up gardens, and there was a lot of, you know, things tied to that as well. And in the end, we gave the plants away, because by pop-up, they were always in, you know, were kind of, you know, it wasn't the traditional demonstration garden. And one of the reasons for that was just purely logistical. Like, you never can sometimes it's difficult to get people to maintain these things once you put them in place. So anyway, so it was really successful, and that's been replicated 3 times now in different townships around the area, and led to the expansion of additional townships, adopted native plant, like neighboring townships. So anyways, I think that anytime you get an opportunity to have a program or a format or a platform that pulls everybody together so that they can all have a voice in the discussion. And I think sometimes, you know, whether it's a municipality, churches are also good, you know, vehicles for that sort of thing, something that is kind of central and core at the heart of a community, and that, you know, kind of a lot of people are connected to for different reasons.
Yeah, I like what you said about having a voice in the discussion. And so our next question is sort of open to anyone. We in CCL really try to get different voices into our community. We work hard to get conservatives and people of color, people from different viewpoints. We welcome those difficult conversations. And so the question is, I'd be curious to hear the panelists talk about the political leanings of their membership. Do they have people from both sides of the aisle working together to meet their goals?
Well, I'll jump in on that. Yes, Assateague Coastal Trust, within our membership, we have conservative leaning folks and more liberal leaning, but they all have a connection to the water one way or another, whether they, have a nice boat and they like to, they live waterfront and they have a nice boat and they want to get out on the water and fish, or, take their grandchildren out on the boat. But that there are others who have never even really, am I having a problem here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. I just clicked off the internet off of my phone too, so that it's not
okay. We're hearing you better now.
Okay. But we also know that we have members of our community who only live 7 miles away from the ocean and from the bays, and a lot of those kids have never even been over there. We also have members of our community who fish to feed their families, and so we know we need to do what we can to keep the water healthy, because that's how they're feeding their families, is they're going out at night and they're fishing off the Ocean City Bridge. So we have found that more often than not, it's someone coming to us and saying, you know, we have a concern about this, or we'd like to know more information about such and such. And it's not so much us going out into the community and saying, you have a problem and here, we're going to help you fix it. It's more when they come to us, then we can work collectively to find the best ways to solve the problem, whether it's a threat to their drinking supply, which was a problem with an African American community in Salisbury a number of years ago, where a massive poultry operation was going to be built right on top of the sole source of their drinking water, and they all were on wells. And in that case, we helped get them the resources that they needed to be able to. So we helped gather data and information for them so that then they could go to their town council and their county council and tell them why this is such a bad idea. And so, you know, we find that quite often we are interacting with, I think the person asking the question said political leaning.
No, we're losing you again.
Yes, you know, we find ourselves dealing with often in Ocean City. Bring these webinars to the public this spring. Okay, is this better? Can you hear me? Anyway, I'll let someone else speak at this point because it's obvious I'm having technical problems.
Okay, let's move on. We only have a couple minutes left. If you could each give us one word that would give us an impression of what you take away from today. Ruth, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you. And Kathy, I appreciated that. And when you said, just with me, everybody across the board comes because they like birds. So that's the one communal thing. And then people learn from other people while they're out enjoying the birds and going to so many different places. I took a lot out of this today, and I definitely will keep in touch with Val and Kathy. And of course, CCL, I have offered you and, you know, did a presentation or two. The pandemic, I've learned that a lot of people are more interested in nature. Take this, everyone, more. I can't tell you, it's kept me so busy during the pandemic with Zooms and videos for different organizations. I am really super busy as I was being out in the field. People want to just get out. They want to know about native plants. They do want to know about the consequences of water and the high tide. Please, everybody, stay involved.
Okay. Val, one word. You have to unmute yourself.
I think empowerment is really the biggest, you know, that's at the heart of everything that I'm doing. And I mean, I just feel that it's so important to help people build on their inner strength, find their inner strength, and be able to use that to make a difference in the issues that they care about.
And how about you, Kathy? You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, I thought my computer is telling me that my internet connection is unstable. So sorry if I go in and out. But yes, the finding the common ground and really when a lot of times people don't think there's common ground between them, but there is, whether it's the birds, whether it's the water, whether it's wanting to be out and about and listening to somebody like Ruth all the time.
Okay.
There are lots of ways to bring diverse audiences together. Lots of.
Thank you. Great words to end with. I want to thank the three of our panelists for being with us and all of our tech support. Thank you. You're all great. And thanks for all our guests for joining us.